would like to ask Dr. Prunty. Let me waste no further time in actually introducing Dr. Michael Prunty.
It's very nice to be here. I'm going to try to... Can you hear me now? Is that better? Can you turn this up at all?
No, that's up here.
Yeah, okay. That's all right. Anyway, you gave most of the lecture already, Al, so I don't have too much more to say. But I do want to say that I know for many of you, September 11 is a date that will live in your memory, and it certainly has been living in my memory for almost 30 years. It was on September 11, 1973, that U.S.-backed military in Chile overthrew the Chilean democracy, which was a democratic coalition government headed by Salvador Allende, Dr. Salvador Allende, and about 30,000 people were killed in that coup over a period of about several years. Another 100,000 were driven into exile or arrested, tortured, and thousands more disappeared, never accounted for, never showed up. Henry Kissinger, who was Secretary of State, and Richard Nixon, who was President, were the people who really were very much behind that coup. That was an act of momentous terror. It was a terrorism. Death squads were used, people were dragged out of their houses, people were put up against the wall in the stadiums and summarily executed. That's terrorism at work. And so it has been in the last half century that U.S. leaders, I don't say the United States, and I don't say we. We go and we do this and we go do that. And we, wait a minute, we pay the taxes, we get screwed over, we get drafted, or we have to go in the army. It's they who do this. U.S. leaders have intervened directly with force and violence. The terror bombing of El Chirrio neighborhoods in Panama City. How many people have heard about it? Not that much, because the media didn't really give it the kind of play that you would get. 3,000 people killed there in Panama City when George the First invaded Panama. The 2 million people who have died in Angola with the CIA-supported UNITA war of attrition against Angola. The almost 1 million who have died in Mozambique, again with these terror squads called Renamo is the headline, the abbreviated title. It's not an acronym really. And again, supported by U.S. forces. The 1 million people who were killed in the military coup in Indonesia, which overthrew Sukarno, a military that was trained, equipped, advised, and whose salaries were even paid by the CIA and the U.S. State Department and such. So there have been these acts of mass murder. Now, the American people know very little of that. Very little of that gets even reported. The Indonesian massacre, in fact, wasn't even reported until several months later, and it got a box like this in Time magazine, and one story in the New York Times with an editorial applauding the military and saying that's very good, that's a stabilizing thing. And in Nicaragua, the Contra-backed, U.S.-backed troops who went in there and hit what they call soft targets, which were farming cooperatives, schools, community houses, granaries, energy stations, housing projects, just hit them and killing people and terrorizing, spreading terror and disillusion, disabling and destabilizing these countries. Rios Montt. Now this is, by the way, what I'm telling you is all a matter of public record. Rios Montt in Guatemala, who went with the Guatemalan army, that maddened, insane murder machine called the Guatemalan army, and President Clinton last year, you remember, 2 years ago, even went and apologized to Guatemala and said, we're sorry for our role when Rios Montt went in there and wiped out 600 Mayan villages, 600 of them, 200,000 people, men, women, and children, killed every single one of them in sight. And Clinton actually apologized and said, I feel your pain, I'm sorry. He didn't explain why was the U.S. supporting this thug and this terrorizer and this murderer. Why are we hated throughout the Middle East after we bombed Somalia and killed 10,000 people with a military intervention? Compliments of George I and Clinton who continued it. Why are we hated throughout Latin America? It's not just the Middle East. You can go through Latin America, you can go through other parts of the world, Pacific world, the Pacific Basin, and you'll find people who will see the United States as intervening everywhere. Intervening either directly with their own troops, as in Grenada, Panama, Somalia, Iraq, Yugoslavia. I was in Yugoslavia in the summer of 1999 after Clinton's 76 days of bombing around the clock. You want to talk about terror? You could see it. This is not, by the way, this is not to justify or excuse what happened in New York, which was a horrible thing. But that's the point. The horror has come home. And we can see suddenly what other people have been going through. Not with a plane going into a building, but with carpet bombing, with knocking out bridges in the Danube River, depleted uranium in the Danube River, which is a source of drinking water for millions of people. The cancer cases. The next year I went to Iraq and I saw children with cancer. They said the cancer, the leukemia rate among children has just skyrocketed, especially in southern Iraq around Basra and there. And to see these kids in these hospitals is one of the most heartbreaking things. From the terror bombing of U.S. and NATO forces in Iraq, spreading out that depleted uranium and everything else. They said we never had a high cancer rate in this country until that happened. All of that is terror. And so people, you see, our media doesn't tell us that. Our media tells us that we are an innocent nation. We are an American nation who has been holding out a helping hand to people all over the world. And now these forces of evil hate us. They hate us because we love freedom. Well, I think the people are rather innocent. I think they're innocent of what their leaders do in their name. And I think maybe it's time that we wake up, because the first condition of a democratic citizenry is to have a critical view of what's going on. I remember during the Gulf War, a student saying to me, well, this is the difference between you and me. Yeah, it's not very pretty what's happening there. They are destroying a lot of things. But I have my faith in President Bush. I place my faith in President Bush. That was the first Bush. Bush the first. George the first he was talking about. And I said, he said, I trust President Bush. I said, what do you mean you have your faith? You have faith in President Bush? Faith? What are we doing? Religion here or politics? You have faith the way my Italian grandma had faith in St. Anthony. She would say, oh, my God. You go, oh, Georgie Bush, you light a candle to him? Or what are you talking about? Faith. What do you mean you trust? Trust, which is something where you put your interest in someone else's hands, something you do only with very close friends and loved ones. And even them, check them out once in a while, right? That's what trust is about. But democracy